So Buju and Denaway Magana dog. Awanakwe, Indigo Ojibwe Gichio Nigamin and Dunjaba, Adiknan Dudame, Onigamin Sin and Da, uh, American Indian Community Housing Organization and Denanoki, Ogamabanes Nin Namoshe. Welcome, all my relatives. Hello, my name is Ivy Vineo. I'm the daughter of a Grand Portage Ojibwe tribal member and a Bahamian immigrant. And I use she, her pronouns. And I am the traditional healing program coordinator for the American Indian Community Housing Organization in Duluth, Minnesota. And AICHO, where I work, is an Indigenous-led, people first nonprofit. And we do many things. We do so many things, really good things for the community. We were established in 1993. We provide housing, a domestic violence shelter, family and culture programming, a cultural arts center, Indigenous health programming, and so much more. All of our work is anchored in our mission to honor the resiliency of Indigenous people by strengthening communities and centering Indigenous values in all aspects of our work. And so miigwech for joining us tonight for this traditional healing from grief and trauma Zoom presentation with Carol Deverney. And I'm going to go over the Zoom rules, participation rules. As you probably noticed, we have all of your videos turned off. If you want to ask a question anytime during the session, you can put it into the chat, and we're going to have a Q&A at the end with Carol that I will moderate, and I will go through the questions in the chat. Becky Norstaban is our Zoom tech. So if you're having some issues where something's not right, send her a message, private message in the chat, and she will try to help you. And again, we're recording the session, and I will be emailing out after the session tonight an email with the Zoom, with the presentation video, and also a survey that we'd like all of you to fill out. And then and also a resource that Carol has shared with us on the stages of grief and trauma. And so that'll be in that email as well as the PowerPoint that will be used tonight. So lots of things coming your way. So tonight, Carol will share the difference between grief and trauma and the physical, psychological, and physiological symptoms of both. She will speak about Anishinaabe culture, values, and teachings, and how connections to traditional, spiritual, and cultural ceremonies and lifeways can foster healing, which we all need. A little bit about Carol. Carol Deverney is a retired mental health therapist who operated a behavioral health department of 42 mental health professionals. Her specialty area was treating children and teens that were suffering from trauma and were in out of home placement. She has also worked 6 years in a trauma center in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, at the Children's Hospital Emergency Room for 6 years as a unit coordinator. She also worked for the Fond du Lac Reservation for 25 years. She has a master's of social work from the University of Minnesota Duluth and 2 years of clinical classes and clinical supervision, LGSW, in clinical social work, plus 40 years work experience, with the last 25 years in social work and mental health direct clinical work and 4 years behavioral health administration. That was a mouthful. And so I just want to say miigwech to our funder for this cultural session. And that is the Minnesota Department of Human Services Behavioral Health Division through AICHO's Waaseyaa Traditional Healing Grant. And we're so thankful that this grant allows us to host community sessions like this one that involve cultural and spiritual health education and opportunities for Indigenous community members to connect and reconnect with their heritage, culture, traditions, and all those beautiful things. I did before we got onto the Zoom, I went outside and I put out a tobacco offering uh to protect all of us that are on this Zoom presentation, and a special request that the Monadug, the spirits that watch out over us, will watch out over all of us, those that are dealing with depression, anxiety, sadness, and so I wanted to let you know that those prayers have been put out for all of us, and those that haven't joined in tonight as well. So I'm gonna turn it over to Carol finally. So miigwech, Carol, for joining us tonight. And again, we're gonna do a Q&A at the end. And so if you have a question, put it in the chat, and we will moderate those questions at the end. So I'm gonna stop my video and I'm gonna mute myself. All right, Carol, take it away.
Okay, miigwech. I'm honored to be here. Jawanokwe, Indigenous, Adik Dudem, Nagachi Wanang, Indonjba. So what I said was hello, and Anin is a greeting as well. Like what's happening, what's going on. And Jawanokwe is my spirit name. It means South Woman. I was given it in a sweat lodge in Fond du Lac, which is Nagachi Wanang is Fond du Lac's name. That's where I am enrolled. And I'm not going to go through anything else talking about my prior work experience because Ivy, miigwech Ivy, for that introduction. You pretty much said everything about my work experience and such. So we're going to get right into traditional healing from grief and trauma. Next. So trauma and grief. Now, I've got there in my professional opinion, one cannot truly heal from trauma without experiencing grief. But you can experience grief without being traumatized. And I'll say that again, you can experience grief without being traumatized. However, for some, experiencing grief, depending on the relationship with the loved one that passed on, whatever that relationship looked like or had looked like, there could be trauma. But always, to truly heal from trauma, you have to, when you process your trauma, you have to grieve it as well. So trauma is defined as a deeply distressing or disturbing experience. Grief is a deep sorrow, that especially that which is caused by someone's death. Now, grief, it doesn't necessarily have to be someone's death. But grief is normal response to a major loss. When I say it doesn't have to be the result of a death, it could also be a relationship, a loss of a significant relationship, loss of a job, loss of your financial means, especially for men, what affects men, well, it affects women as well, but more so with men. When men say that a man is experiencing a chronic health problem that leaves him to where he can't work the job that he normally did, um, such as if somebody were if a man was a roofer or a carpenter or a laborer, or for that matter any employment, if they can't do it anymore because of a health problem, and they can't in their mind, they may feel useless, like I can't take care of my family now, and that will cause grief. Um, Next. Now, examples of trauma experiences. We're going to go through the trauma first. Growing up in foster care without your biological parents, or having a connection with your biological relatives, is a trauma experience. Loss of identity, experiencing active military combat. When experiencing active military combat can bring on the post-traumatic stress syndrome, PTSD. Um, I'm sure some of you out there must have heard about PTSD. That is a trauma response, the PTSD or symptom. Witnessing a horrific death or witnessing an accident where somebody got hurt or even died from an accident, sexual trauma, rape, such as rape, experiencing that or even seeing that uh, can be a traumatic experience. Natural disasters, acts of violence, physical abuse, neglect, bullying. Now, bullying is sort of on the rise. Maybe it's always been there, but because of social media, we know more. We hear of victims of bullying, and some of our adolescents or our adolescents to me are 12 years and up. Children are from 6 years to 12 years or 11 years. So suicide among adolescents a lot of them are caused by bullying. So bullying can cause trauma such that the person being bullied will want to end their life and have ended their life. Let's see, growing up in foster care without biological parents. Part of that, a big part of that has to do with loss of identity. A lot of our people that Anishinaabe people, American Indian people, grew up in foster care due to the boarding school era. Now, anything I mention here, you can Google. Those of you who want to really understand what we as American Indian people or Anishinaabe people have experienced and why they suffer trauma. Boarding school eras is a huge one. Kids were taken from their families and put into boarding schools that were run like military camps, and their hair cut and everything, and they were beaten if they spoke their language. That is a loss of identity, and a loss of identity can be as devastating as drug addiction, alcoholism. When you think about it, if you don't know who you are and you try to blend in with the dominant culture or with society, and you can't do that either, um, that causes major problems. That a symptom of a loss of identity on a higher level, a more severe level, losing your identity, can lead to alcoholism and drug addiction. Um, let's see, experiencing active military combat. One thing that through my experience, now everything we're talking about here, I have lived this experience, or I've been educated in these different treatment modalities as a mental health therapist. And I grew up in foster care. And I understand loss of identity because I experienced that. So a lot of this is lived experience. The my specialty area when I was practicing as a mental health therapist, I worked with children that were in out of home placement, in foster care, and coming out of drug induced environments. And a lot of them had PTSD. And so PTSD for children is not unusual. And some of the research out there will say that that it's rare. Well, no, it isn't. Not if you've experienced if you have parents who were drug addicted, or battling alcoholism. Okay, next page, or next. Examples of grief and loss. So death of a spouse or significant other, or death of a child, death of a pet, loss of a significant relationship, loss of a loved one by terminal illness. I gave a grief and loss presentation to about 100 elders a couple years ago. And after that presentation, somebody came up to me and said, "You know, you're the only one that ever said that it was okay to feel normal when you lose a loved one, especially if you've taken care of a loved one and seen them through their chronic illness or their terminal illness. And when they pass on, you have a feeling of, you have a big relief. And that's okay. It's very okay to have a feeling of relief, because now your loved one isn't suffering anymore. And there's nothing wrong with feeling relief, especially if you were the caregiver for a terminally ill spouse or significant other. And this person thanked me for saying that, because she said nobody ever told her that. So I felt I needed to dwell on that one for a minute. Death of a pet. Death of a pet can be pretty significant. They're part of the family. They are a family member, and we all love our pets. And when they pass on, we grieve them. And there's different levels of grief, and the level of grief will depend on the relationship that you had with the person that passed on. how significant was the relationship. Not to minimize or anything like that, but there are different levels of grief, is my point. Loss of fertility. Even with women, loss of fertility is a big one. Loss of we when we have our periods, when women have their periods, we call that, in our culture, we call it their moon time. So some of us, I know I was one of them, when I experienced loss when my period stopped, even though sometimes it's a hassle for us as women, but still, when it wasn't there anymore, it was like, oh my goodness, I don't have this anymore. What's going to happen to me? You know, am I going to start growing hair where I don't want it? You know, that kind of thing. You have all these thoughts, and it can be quite disturbing, um, even when your change comes. For women, when they hit their change. Loss of independence. And I talked a little bit about that. It's especially significant for men because society looks at men as being the major caregivers, the one that keeps the family together. Although now this has changed over the years. Now it takes two parents to raise a family, working parents. And loss of financial stability, employment, loss of a job can affect us. We grieve all of these things. Any loss, there's a certain amount of grief. There could be a big amount of grief. The difference between grief and trauma, though, is kind of huge. And we'll go to the next page. So differences related to trauma. Now, trauma is deep-rooted and long-standing, and it's stored in the limbic system. The limbic system is consists of the amygdala, the hippocampus, the prefrontal cortex. And there is more to that limbic system, but we're not going to go into that right now. PTSD, post-traumatic stress, is stored in the amygdala. And in order to heal PTSD, we have to utilize trauma treatment modalities that help to decrease those trauma triggers. I'll talk a little bit about what is a trauma trigger. Now, traditional Anishinaabe healing ceremonies can eliminate trauma symptoms. So, Western medicine, the treatment modalities, Western treatment modalities can bring the trauma to the surface, because trauma lies deep. Like I said, it lies deep in the amygdala. That's a little bitty part of the brain, deep in the brain. In order to process trauma, the therapist has to bring that trauma out to the forefront, because our brain, being the wonderful organ that it is, it helps us to survive trauma by hiding it, storing it. But if we don't process it and so that we're healed from it, those triggers will continue to get triggered. It could be a smell, a noise, anything that could bring up the trauma that we experience. The trauma triggers depend on our trauma experience. In our traditional Anishinaabe healing ceremonies now, I'll talk a little bit more about our healing ceremonies and how our ceremonies and our cultural way of life actually is healing to the brain where trauma is stored. Trauma is also in the body. I don't know if there's any psychologists out there, other mental health therapists. Bessel, Bessel, Vanderkalt, I believe. He says that trauma is stored in the body. The body, his big saying is the body keeps the score. And what that means is when the PTSD is stored in the amygdala and a trauma trigger results, we hear something, we smell something, we see something, and we're being triggered. That impacts our whole body, our physiological body. Okay, next. And this is a picture of the limbic system, our brain, and the cerebellum, the pituitary glands, hypothalamus, the cerebrum. And if you can see where the amygdala is, that's that little yellow part. And that's way down there in our brain. And what mental health therapy, the trauma treatments do is they get that they have to uncover the trauma experience and bring it to the forefront and then process the trauma. And it's like peeling an onion. Some of us may have trauma after trauma after trauma. It depends, you know. Part of that could be historical trauma, intergenerational trauma, on top of the current traumas. And it's a matter of getting those out into I would say the prefrontal cortex, where your memory is, where where you can see it and think. Uncovering the trauma and bringing it forward. And as mental health therapists, we need to assess whether a person is able to keep be able to uncover the trauma, but know that they're safe. They would have to process the trauma in a safe environment. So they'd keep one foot back there experiencing the trauma and one foot in the here and now, where they know that they're talking to you as a therapist. They're talking about their trauma, but they're in a safe place. Okay, that's just a real simple example of how we bring trauma to the forefront. Always have to have a safe place to process trauma. Okay, next. Trauma treatment modalities. So EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing. I was trained in EMDR. I was also trained in brain spotting. This presentation is too short to be going into all EMDR and how that works. What I can say about brain spotting is, from what I've learned, and I have used it on people, it's a shortcut. It's a shorter way to bring up the trauma than EMDR. I'm just going to say that. And people can Google EMDR and they can Google brain spotting. Now, hypnotherapy, I was not trained in, but some of my staff was trained in hypnotherapy. Very, very long training process. But hypnotherapy, we found out, reduces anxiety. It's almost like an immediate response of an anxiety reduction. A lot of people that are in recovery from drug addiction or even alcoholism, they may experience high incidences of anxiety. You know, not being able to be in a crowd for very long, or things like that, and or something dreadful is going to happen, so they have panic attacks, or hypnotherapy, I do know, is almost like an immediate anxiety, decreases anxiety almost immediately. And the reason I know that, being the coordinator or the administrator of a behavioral health department, and also utilizing EMDR on people who were suffering with PTSD. Children, I used EMDR on children. But first, I had to assess whether they could understand the process, and it works. That's all I'm going to say about that. Brain spotting too works. Brain spotting I did not use on any children. I use it on adults. And this is just a snippet of what you're getting tonight on these trauma treatments. There's other trauma treatment modalities out there. So the tools for trauma treatment, you screen for trauma. Now, there are trauma screening tools that you should be using. If you feel there's if there is any indication that the person might be or may have experienced trauma. For the Native American population, a trauma question would be, who raised you? Were you raised by your biological parents, or were you raised by foster parents? Not that being raised by foster parents is a bad thing. I mean, that's going to cause trauma. In other words, we want children to be raised by their biological parents and not have to be raised by foster parents. Don't get me wrong, but if they were raised by foster parents, you might want to dig a little further, because what I've found out when doing trauma treatment for children that were in out-of-home placement in foster care, a lot of those kiddos had PTSD, all the symptoms of PTSD. And some of them came out of drug-induced environment, and they were hypervigilant. Every little noise they were afraid of. Those kinds of things, those kinds of symptoms that children experience if they were traumatized. But I think everybody should be screened for trauma. And there are different kinds of trauma screenings out there. Again, you should know the population that you're serving, you should know what their history is. Okay. Identifying trauma triggers. A trauma trigger is that which causes emotional discomfort unique to the individual. It's unique to the individual, the triggers. It depends on their trauma experience. What did their trauma look like? And the frequency, how often are they being triggered, will determine the level of traumatization. Okay, next. Grief and loss treatment modalities. So a lot of us do cognitive behavioral therapy or psychotherapy, self-care. Those are grief and loss treatments. Now, for us as Anishinaabe people, and I use the word Anishinaabe, not Ojibwe or Chippewa. Those are non-native terms for us as a people. We are Anishinaabe. That's how we like to identify ourselves. And for us as a people, self-care means passing your asema, which is the Anishinaabe word for tobacco. It always starts with the tobacco. When we want to go to a traditional healer, we have to take our tobacco and present our tobacco and tell them we want to ask them for help. Cedar baths. So the medicines out there, cedar, sage, tobacco, the natural tobacco, and other medicines, traditional medicines. Cedar baths, we can take a bath in, boil the cedar, take a bath. We use cedar water medicine in our sweat lodges. When somebody passes in our culture, if we have loved ones that have passed away, we put out spirit dishes for them. So whenever we cook a big meal, we put everything that we cooked. Now it could be a big feast or it could be a simple supper. Potatoes, meat, salad, bread. Put a little dish out, put your tobacco in there, and put that plate outside in a tree. Or if you're putting a spirit dish out for your loved one that had passed away, you could get a tin can. If you can locate a tin can, I don't know if they make tin cans anymore, but put the food on a paper plate, put your tobacco in there, put it in that can and burn it. And that smoke, that will get to those spirits quicker. Sweat lodge, we can utilize our sweat lodges and pray for our loved ones. And healing ceremonies. Now, Fond du Lac, that's my tribe or band that I'm enrolled in. And that's who I worked for the last 25 years. And they have a cultural center, actually language and culture. And we do have a traditional healer. And the reason why our traditional healing ways are so important is because it's natural to us. Sometimes the Western way, sometimes these treatment modalities may not help our people. The what I just said about the trauma treatment modalities, they can bring those traumas to the forefront, to that prefrontal lobe. But it's our traditional healing ceremonies that take it and get rid of it so that it's not there anymore. And of course, we have to believe in our traditional ways. If these things are going to work, we have to believe in our ways. Our Anishinaabe people have to believe in their traditional ceremonies. Some of the traditional ceremonies I've mentioned here is wiping of the tears ceremony. Now, wiping of the tears ceremony, if you're grieving and you're grieving heavily, meaning it's been a year, maybe even 2 years, and you're still having a hard time, you're still crying, you're still very, very emotional over the loved one that passed away, then you may want to pass your tobacco and ask for a wiping of the tears ceremony. Very healing. And most of the Anishinaabe tribes and bands do this ceremony. Or you could have a grief ceremony done. That's another type of ceremony. And or you could go and have individual or even family traditional counseling. But always you would pass that tobacco when you ask for these things. Let's see. Oh, and also big drum ceremonies is also a healing ceremony. I don't have that written there, but I'm going to be expanding on this presentation because there's a lot to all of this. Okay, next. Okay, so this is grief and loss continued. Grief and loss. Now we do have an attachment on grief and loss, and that's where we go into the physiological symptoms, what we're feeling in our body. We go into what we're thinking. So, and then spiritually, how are we affected? And that's going to be a handout that you'll get. I can physiologically, when we're grieving, we feel it in our body, our stomach, that hollow feeling in your stomach, or you cannot sleep and you're very emotional and you want to isolate. Sometimes you don't want to see anybody because you want to be by yourself and all you want to do is sleep. But when you wake up, there's that pain, that emotional pain. So what I say is do not isolate. Don't isolate too long, because let your friends and your relatives aid you in your grieving process. Because of the the natural hormones in our body, like oxytocin, that's sometimes referred to as a love hormone. And like it says here, it's released in response to low stimulation of the skin. In other words, when somebody hugs you, and because they're giving you condolences, let them hug you, because that releases that oxytocin from the stimulation of the hug or the touch on your skin. We need that when we're grieving. We need to feel we need to feel loved. cortisol levels. Okay, now cortisol levels is another hormone, natural hormone in our body that responds to stress. But that will increase. Cortisol will increase in our body, cortisol levels, when things are majorly stressful. For example, when I was seeing children, I could see that they had high cortisol levels because they were dysregulated, they couldn't sit still, they were hypervigilant. Um, the air conditioner would go on and the child would jump. What's that? What's that? Um, or if they had been abused, a sudden movement of your hand or your arm or whatever, they'd flinch. A lot of that is brought on by high cortisol levels in your body or with children. Some of them who were exposed to drug environments. If you think about what a drug environment looks like, you've got people coming in and out of your house, out of your house, your home, where you are supposed to feel safe, but yet you have strangers coming in and out. And maybe parents are going and spending large amount of time in one room with the door closed. And the kids don't know what's going on, but yet, and they don't know the people that are coming in and out. That can cause high cortisol levels in children because that anxiety of not knowing what's going to come next. Children that have been traumatized, what I know about children that have been traumatized is in order for children to heal, they have to be in a safe environment. They have to have consistency. Consistency is what heals a traumatized child. And when you think about it, when you know what's going to happen an hour later, maybe an hour later, you're going to sit down and have a meal with your family. Maybe after that, you are going to sit down and watch a movie together. Children have to know from one moment to the next, at least the next day, what is going to be, what's happening, what's going on. Will I go to school tomorrow? Will I eat tomorrow? So when they don't know, when they do not have that kind of consistency, cortisol levels increase. Okay, and in the handout, we have the stages of grief. One of those that I pointed out was sometimes we sense a presence of our loved one that had passed on. Seeing or hearing the deceased, that's common in our Anishinaabe culture. That is not a psychiatric thing that exists and it's only in our mind. Our culture, our values and everything. One of our beliefs is that we are a spirit having a physical existence. And when we pass on, it is our spirit that remains. And our spirit enters a spiritual existence. And so we're talking two existence, spirit or physical and spiritual. To me, this makes a lot of sense. We also, as Anishinaabe people, we also believe a lot in our dreams. And for those of you out there, those of you Native American people that have dreams, they're bothering you, or maybe they're so profound that you want to know what they mean, you can pass your tobacco to a traditional healer and they could possibly interpret that dream for you. we should understand our dreams. However, when we dream, we may not have the answer immediately the next day, but it'll come. It might not be tomorrow. It might not be 2 weeks from now. That has happened to me. I've experienced that dreams, which told me what my path was going to be. And I'm not going to go into that in this presentation. I'll use it as an example if I present this again, because this presentation is going to get, there's going to be more added to it eventually as we go on. So next. Next. I did read some questions that Ivy had put out there to the people that were interested in this presentation. Those that want to work with Anishinaabe people or Native American populations, and for that matter, any population, if you're going to be working with them, whether that's in the mental health field, whether that's in the social work field, you have to understand what their culture, what their population experienced historically. And for us as Anishinaabe people, there are the historical traumas, the boarding school era, you can Google that, the Indian Wars. I think those were in the 1800s, 1860s. You can Google that.
Oh,
Government policy aimed at terminating Native American populations. Government policies in the 40s, I believe the 30s, that set up boarding schools for Native American children to take the Indian out of the child. The policy was to get at the Native American. We will go through his children. So that's when the boarding school era started. And these were not boarding schools like they are today. These were military run schools where kids were ripped out of their homes, their from their biological parents, and put into the boarding school. And then their parents didn't see them till they were 18 years old. And some kids died at those boarding schools. And that's horrific stuff, but that's part of our history. Assimilation. If you can't outright terminate the Native American, then let's assimilate them into the mainstream culture. So, and there's more historical examples than what I'm showing here. Then we have the intergenerational, the state foster care systems. I talked about that. Children there was a big push by foster care system to take kids out of their biological homes and put them into foster care homes, white homes. And of course, the foster parents would get a stipend for a Native child. And I forget what amount that was, 150 or 50 for 50 per Native child, $50 back in the 50s and the 40s. Mission schools. No, I went to a mission school and I was in foster care, but mission schools, there was a mission school on just about every Indian reservation in the nation. And of course, those were run by nuns and priests. And that part of that was toward assimilating the American Indian into mainstream society. We could no longer speak our language, and so we did not understand our values anymore. And I'll talk about values a little later, how they are direct opposite of Western values. Religious abuse. I have a really good personal example of religious abuse, which I'm not going to say right now. I'll say that at another presentation because we don't have enough time. Colonialism, colonial thinking. And you can Google colonial thinking, colonialism, and the meaning of that. Loss of identity, because everything was taken, the culture, the language, we couldn't speak our language, our ceremonies, we couldn't participate in our ceremonies. You know, it was dangerous for us, for our ancestors to do that. Current traumas like alcoholism, opioid epidemic, loss of identity again, blood quantum, and unengaged biological parents who are not raising their children. Now, we do have in our culture, our ancestors, the aunties, the uncles, the grandparents would help the biological parents raise the children. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about biological parents who don't connect with their kids. The grandparents are raising them, or the great grandparents are raising them, probably due to the opioid use. There's a big resurgence toward our identity. I notice over the years. So that loss of identity, hopefully, is becoming more. There's an increase in our Native people knowing who they are and participating more in culture. I was just at a powwow a couple weeks ago, and there's so many young people on that reservation that was learning their language. A lot of them were talking the language. That was so good to hear. Blood quantum. Blood quantum is something that was driven by government policy. It was a way for the American Indian, or us as Anishinaabe people, to terminate ourselves because the government assigned fractionated amounts to our identity as a Native American or Anishinaabe person. For example, my dad is enrolled in Red Cliff. My mother is enrolled in Fond du Lac. They only used government policy, or then the tribes themselves. We are guilty of this ourselves. I hate to say it, of the ongoing process of utilizing blood quantum to identify who and who is not an Indian or an American Indian. Fractionated amounts were used, like both my parents were Native American, but yet, and I should be a full blood, right? No, because they only used half of my parents, my mom. If I would have been enrolled over in Red Cliff through my dad's side, then I wouldn't have been able to use my mom's blood quantum. So I'm cut in half from the get-go. My children, my grandchildren, were not eligible to be enrolled. That's what blood quantum means, and that's what it does. Fractionated amounts of who you are, blood, wise as an American Indian or an Anishinaabe person. And there's so much that goes in the blood quantum. We just can't talk about it all here. So we'll go on to the next screen. So with all of that, there are gaps in the current mental health systems. There's the failure of hospital systems to serve Native Americans with mental health concerns. And I know that because as a coordinator of a behavioral health program, we tried very hard to get our people that were suffering with mental health having episodes that needed to be stabilized, their mental health to be stabilized. And the mental health systems in the hospital did not have it all together, at least not for our people. There's people that actually committed suicide because they couldn't get the necessary mental health services from the hospital systems. And it now, when you look at these social systems, these large institutions like hospital systems, social service systems, those are all big systems. A simple change is a big deal. What hospital systems have to do if they're committed to servicing Native American people with mental health concerns, they have to meet with the tribal agencies because just about every tribal agency has a clinic, has a medical clinic, dental clinic, they have behavioral health services. A lot of the tribal agencies have multiple resources. But when you go outside the tribal agencies, that's when you hit the barriers. And it's the same for non-tribal people as well to get good mental health services. But if the hospitals and the tribal agencies, if the administrators from the hospitals would meet, have a sit-down discussion with the administrators from the tribal agencies and come up with a process to seamlessly service Native Americans in the mental health with mental health concerns, because every hospital has services for the mentally ill. It's a matter of figuring out a process and how to seamlessly connect those. And there's also not enough mental health providers who understand Native American lived experience or their value system. I thought I had a page on value system. Native American, okay, here we go. So the 7 grandfather teachings, these are our traditional teachings and our values: humility, bravery, honesty, wisdom, truth, respect, and love. Each oral tradition, each bravery is represented by the bear, the makwa, and the wolf represents humility, and I think the beaver represents wisdom, and so on and so forth. So we have animals who are keepers of these 7 grandfather teachings, which is our value system. Now, some of the differences, there's all kinds of differences, but I only cited 3 differences here: Native American values versus Western European values. Because any of you out there that's going to work with Native American people, you should understand these value systems if you're going to understand the mental health piece. or even how to help our people. Okay, so the Anishinaabe says one cannot own the earth because the earth is a living, breathing entity and has a spirit. Anything that has a spirit, you cannot own. For example, if a pwagan or a pipe is a sacred, uh, one of our sacred items that we use for healing. We pray with a pipe. Now, once that pipe is put together, once it's made and it's prayed over, feasted, that pipe then has a spirit. We don't say, I got to get my pipe or I got to get it's not my, it is the. I have to get the pipe. I have to use the pipe. We don't take ownership of anything that has a spirit. And everything living, the trees, the grass, Mama Nanaki, Mother Earth. Mother Earth is a living, breathing entity. One cannot own the earth. Materialism, capitalism, wealth in the Western way means complete ownership. Monetary value equates to success. So success to Anishinaabe means a kind heart, a kind spirit, giving to those in need, and recognizing that the animals or all living things are our relatives. The trees, the flowers, the grass are living, breathing. Giving to those in need. Now, in our culture, we have a lot of giveaways where a family will get together because over the years maybe they've been blessed with good things culturally, like maybe a lot of their family has gone through the medicine lodge, maybe they belong to the big drum. Ceremony has helped them, those money dues, those spirits have helped them, so they get together and they buy a lot of things and they give it away to the community. And we have a lot of, we call those giveaways. And that's what I mean by a kind heart, a kind spirit, giving to those in need, and recognizing the animals and all living things as our relatives. For example, another example is when we take from the earth, when we kill a deer, when we harvest wild rice. Before we do any of that, we throw our tobacco, our asema, we throw it on the ground as an offering. To get something, you have to give something. That's throughout, I think that's throughout all American Indian cultures. I believe we all use asema or tobacco before we take something. When we pick sage, when we pick cedar, we have to put our tobacco offerings out. I'm wondering, is there another page after this one, after gaps? I have to say one more thing that has to do with suffering, historical, intergenerational, current traumas. One of the current traumas is what we refer to as cultural misappropriation. And what that means is, I'll give you some examples. Well, I'll define it first. It's using cultural elements without understanding and respecting the culture's original context. or it's profiting financially or socially from a minority's culture, or oversimplifying a culture, or making fun of a culture, treating a culture as a joke, cultural ways, values. And a good example of that is, and I don't know if any of you out there have heard about this. I certainly have. And I think this might have been a few years back where a non-native man took it upon himself, and I think this happened out west in Montana or someplace, I don't know, to start conducting sweat lodges. And people died in that sweat lodge. He was conducting sweat lodges for other non-natives. And he, in other words, what he did, he took advantage of people that were seeking a spiritual path. And non-natives suffocated in that sweat lodge because he did not open the door so that people could get air or breathe, or plus he was charging them 10,000 to go in that sweat lodge. Now that is a big example of cultural misappropriation, and that's one of the current that would be a current trauma. And I guess it's question and answer time.
Yeah, we could go into questions. Thank you, miigwech, Carol, for everything that you shared with us tonight. I have
I
been
hope it
in
I hope it made sense.
it really did. Yes. You made sense. Um, I have been I benefited from being in ceremony with you. And I know that ceremony works, and being connected to traditions. Um, and I know that asking for help is like really a really hard thing to do, and it's sometimes seen as a weakness, but it's really a strength. And I was wondering if you could talk about that, and folks that have other questions, please put them in the chat.
Okay, that was something that was very hard for me to do because I grew up, like I said, I had grown up in foster care, and but I also grew up thinking that the only one that can get anything done and get it done right is me, myself. Um, I I had a hard time asking for help from anybody. I had to do it myself. When I went through the medicine lodge, um, we needed a certain amount of people to help us. And I did not understand the ways yet of the lodge. And my mentors said, well, we'll just go around and ask from the community. And oh my gosh, I almost had a heart attack because I thought, ask, I don't even know these people. And the person that was helping me, it's okay, it'll be all right. And she just kept saying that to me. So we were knocking on people's doors. I had to ask them to come help me go through the lodge. And everybody they were all used to being asked, and they were used to helping people through the lodge. So, and that was another big eye opener for me. And that was a lesson that it really humbled me. Um, I felt that in my heart. In that ceremony, I felt that in my heart that these people all showed up to help me. And I never had a feeling like that before until then. The humility, the joy, and the gratitude of this ceremony, of that ceremony, and the people coming together to help me. It was just overwhelming. It was a good overwhelming, though. I was happy, very happy. And our ceremonies they are powerful. We have to believe in them. We have to believe that they're going to work. I know one of my mentors said, if if you don't believe that the our ways are going to help, well, then you'll have to go the Western way. I mean, it was simple as that. And I understood. I understood what she meant.
Yeah.
So,
So we have a comment by Dana. Miigwech Carol for talking about cultural misappropriation. There is so much medicine, sage, and sweetgrass being sold at ridiculously high prices. I understand that some people have to buy due to not having any other access, but I would hope more giving of these medicines would be shared. Miigwech for sharing your knowledge.
oh, miigwech. I'm honored.
Yeah. Are there any other questions for Carol? Thank you for your time for this information. There are not too many Anishinaabe mental health facilitators to reach out to. I would love more in-depth information on healing after traumatic, tragic experience.
All right. Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Well, like I said, we are going to expand on this presentation. This could actually go a couple of hours, you know,
It really could.
might have to split it in half or something.
Part two.
I
Um,
think,
and Carol had have some notes for me to send to all of you after this session. So you'll be getting that as well, as well as the slideshow. Um, I thought this was so special. Thank you, Carol. Do you have a social media? I run a BIPOC community page where we heal outdoors. I'd love to work with you in the future. This is from Hazel Herrera.
yeah, well, you could give her my number,
Okay,
or how do you want to do this, Ivy? I mean,
I
maybe
think
have her.
the email.
Okay.
So
Okay.
earlier in the email or in the chat, Becky put Carol's email. So reach out to her that way. Um, and then you can get connected. I do want to say before we break away, we're getting a lot of miigweches here from everybody. Um, that I will be sending out an email with the survey. I put the survey link in the chat as well, but I'll be sending out the other information on grief and trauma and healing that Carol shared, and then the survey link. And then I wanted to let you all know that our next cultural Zoom is going to be December 11th at 6 o'clock, same time. And it's going to be with Bonnie Fairbanks. She's from Leech Lake, Leech Lake, Ojibwe, Anishinaabe, tribal member. And her title of her presentation is Our Sacred Gift, Carrying Our Babies in a Good Way. And so we're going to be doing that, and I'll be putting out registration information early October for that. Follow us on our AICHO Facebook page, American Indian Community Housing Organization Facebook page, and we put everything there. And you'll have my email when I send it to you. So if you want to be included on that information on the next session, uh, please let me know. And then there we'll have two other cultural healing, traditional healing themed sessions in next year. And so these will continue. And I just want to say miigwech again, chi miigwech, apachigo miigwech to Carol for spending your time, your knowledge, sharing cultural ways to heal and to connect. I think all of us have um, issues with some sort of issue with these things, anxiety, stress, um, and if it's not us, it's a family member or a relative. And so hearing what you shared tonight really was beneficial and made so much sense and so many connections. So just want to say miigwech. And if there's any last thing that you have forgot to say or you'd like to say, feel free to do that now. Um, or we can just end. What you want to do, Carol?
Oh, I'm going to be giving this presentation September 11th at the women's gathering that Fond du Lac's putting on. It might not be the exact same thing. I'm going to expand on it, but it'll be more on grief and trauma.
Okay. Is that open to anybody?
I believe so.
Mhm.
Uh, I I forget who's handling that. You could call the social services, Fond du Lac Social Services, because they're the ones putting it on. Oh, and I think they are partnering with behavioral health, Fond du Lac Behavioral Health.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So get a
Uh,
hold of them.
Okay.
Women's gathering. It's actually September 10th and 11th, and I'm
Okay.
presenting on the 11th.
Oh, that's good information. I'll reach out to them and try to get some more information on that as well. So miigwech for that. Um, all right. Well, we are at 7:24, so I'm going to say miigwech to all of you for joining us as well, and be on the lookout for more information via email and our Facebook page. And yeah, um, I guess we'll let you go. Thanks, Carol.
Giga Wabamin
Wow, I'm in.
around.